The wrong seat. The seat number was 4A. It was printed on a boarding pass that cost more than most people in that terminal spent on groceries in a month. The man holding it walked through the gate with the particular gait of someone who had never once in his adult life been made to wait. His name was Richard Holt. He was 51 years old, the founder of a logistics empire that stretched across 14 countries, and he had not carried his own luggage since 2009. He wore a watch that cost more than a car. He made eye contact with the gate agent in the way people make eye contact when they want you to know they are important without having to say so. He did not say good morning. He sat in 4A, accepted a glass of sparkling water before the cabin door had even closed, and opened his laptop with the practiced efficiency of a man who considered every hour not spent working a kind of small personal failure. The flight from London to New York was 7 hours and 40 minutes. He intended to use every one of them. He did not notice the woman in seat 31F. Nobody noticed the woman in seat 31F. That was not unusual. Nadia Ose was 34 years old and had spent the better part of the last decade learning how to be invisible in rooms where visibility could get you killed. She had a carry-on bag that was held together at the left handle with a strip of electrical tape. She wore a gray knit sweater that had been washed so many times the elbows had gone thin. She had the kind of stillness that people mistake for exhaustion, though it was not exhaustion. It was the specific quality of someone who has learned that paying close attention to everything around you is not a habit. It is a survival skill. Her boarding pass had cost $212. It was the only fare she could afford after the research grant had covered her conference registration, but not, it turned out, the airfare back. She placed her bag under the seat in front of her, folded her hands in her lap, and looked out the window at the gray London morning. She did not open a laptop. She did not order a drink. She thought about the presentation she had just given at St. Thomas's Hospital, the one on field triage protocols for penetrating chest trauma in resource-limited environments, and whether the second panel had understood the part about tension pneumothorax and the improvised valve. She thought they probably had. She hoped they had. That part mattered. The plane lifted into the cloud cover and leveled out somewhere above the Atlantic, and the cabin settled into the particular suspended quiet of long-haul flight. 52 minutes into the flight, a sound came from row 7. It was not a dramatic sound. It was not the kind of sound that announces itself. It was the sound of a man's glass hitting a tray table with slightly too much force, followed by a brief silence, followed by the sound of a seatbelt unclicking, then a flight attendant's voice, sharp and controlled. "Sir, are you—" Then nothing for 2 seconds that lasted much longer than 2 seconds. Then, "Is there a doctor on board? Is there anyone with medical training on board?" The cabin did not erupt. That is not what cabins do. What they did was go very, very still, the way a room goes still when something real has entered it and everyone present understands, without being told that the ordinary rules have briefly suspended. The man in 7C had gone gray. His right hand was pressed flat against his sternum. His jaw was rigid. Beside him, his wife had both hands over her mouth and was saying his name in the particular rhythm of a person who is saying a name because they do not know what else to do with the fear. 2 flight attendants were already moving. The senior attendant, a woman named Claire, who had been flying transatlantic routes for 19 years, reached for the intercom and repeated the request. "Medical professional, any medical professional, please identify yourself," with the kind of calm that is not the absence of alarm, but the disciplined management of it. Nobody moved. In first class, Richard Holt had looked up from his laptop at the first announcement. He looked around the cabin. He looked at the faces of the other passengers, the consultant in 3B, the retired couple in 5A and 5B, the young man in 6C who had already put his earphones back in. Nobody moved. Richard Holt looked back at his screen. He was, as it happened, in the middle of a restructuring proposal that was due to his board in 11 hours. He was also, as it happened, a man who had built an entire professional identity around the belief that every problem had someone else whose job it was to handle it. He looked at the man in 7C, who was now leaning sideways in his seat, He looked away. If you believe that the most important people in any room are not always the ones in the best seats, please stay with this story. And if it moves you, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that quiet people carry extraordinary things. Nadia had heard the first announcement from row 31. She had processed it the way she processed most things. Quickly, completely, and without visible reaction. She had sat for 4 seconds, not from hesitation, but from the particular discipline of someone who knows that rushing into an emergency without first completing a rapid mental assessment is how emergencies get worse. She ran through what she knew. Mid-flight cardiac event. Probable myocardial infarction based on the description of symptoms she could hear secondhand through the cabin. Limited equipment. No cath lab. No defibrillator team. Just a metal tube at 38,000 feet and whatever was in the medical kit. She stood up. She did not announce herself. She did not make a scene of it. She simply stood, moved to the aisle, and walked forward with the unhurried purposefulness of someone who knows exactly where they are going and why. Claire saw her coming and felt, later, that she could not entirely explain why she stepped aside immediately. Something in the way the woman moved. Not urgency, steadiness. The difference between a person running toward something and a person arriving at something they have already assessed. "I'm a physician," Nadia said. "Cardiothoracic emergency medicine." "What's your kit?" Claire told her. Nadia nodded once. "Get it open. I need the aspirin first, and then I'll need you to bring me the AED, and I'll want to know the nearest diversion airport before I'm finished assessing him." She knelt beside the man in 7C. His name was Jeffrey. He was 63 years old, and he was having a STEMI, a ST elevation myocardial infarction, a complete blockage of a coronary artery. And he had, Nadia estimated in the first 40 seconds of her assessment, been symptomatic for somewhere between 15 and 25 minutes before anyone had called for help. He was conscious. That was something. His pressure was dropping. That was not. She worked. For the next 40 minutes, Nadia Ose worked the way she had learned to work in a field hospital in South Sudan, in a clinic outside Aden, in a mobile unit in the Rakhine corridor, where the equipment was always wrong and the situation was always worse than the briefing had suggested, and the only thing you could rely on was the training you had put into your hands until it stopped being knowledge and became instinct. She stabilized him. Not fixed. There was no fixing a STEMI at altitude without a catheterization lab. But stabilized, managed, kept him conscious and his pressure workable and his pain reduced and his oxygen levels from falling below the threshold where decisions become irreversible. She talked to him the entire time, not to comfort him in the way people talk to comfort, but because she knew that a conscious patient with a responsive physician is a patient who is still in the fight. The plane diverted to Gander, Newfoundland. A ground medical team was waiting on the tarmac. Nadia walked Jeffrey off the plane on her own 2 feet, which is to say, she walked beside him as the paramedics took the stretcher, and she gave the ground physician the most precise verbal handoff he said he had ever received in 22 years of emergency medicine. She included the exact timeline, the medications administered, the hemodynamic readings at 8-minute intervals, and her differential reasoning for why she had made each decision in the sequence she had made. Them. Then she stepped back. Then she picked up her bag with the electrical tape on the handle and went to find somewhere to sit down while they figured out the rebooking. Richard Holt had watched from row 4. He was not a man given to self-examination. He had built his life carefully around the avoidance of moments that required it. But there is a particular experience that has no defense against it, which is watching someone do something you could not have done and understanding, fully, in real time, the precise dimensions of what you were looking at. He had watched a woman in a thin gray sweater walk into the worst situation on that aircraft and handle it with a competence so complete it looked, from the outside, almost like ease. He had watched her move through 40 minutes of genuine life-or-death pressure without raising her voice, without faltering, without anything that looked like performance. Just work, just extraordinarily precise, extraordinarily calm, extraordinarily capable work. He had not moved from his seat. That fact was sitting on his chest in a way he could not name and did not try to. In Gander, while passengers milled around the small terminal waiting for information about the delay, Richard Holt found her. She was sitting in a molded plastic chair near the window, drinking terrible coffee from a paper cup, and she had the look of someone who has done something very large and is now very quietly letting the adrenaline finish leaving her body. He sat down beside her without asking if the seat was taken. "You saved his life?"